Welcome to another edition of the game. I'm Mark Simon.
And I'm Bob Marks.
And here we are. At the end of the show, what we used to do is Bob and I would talk to each other, as much as we hated doing that, and call it the bullpen. So this is like the baseball equivalent of a bullpen game. We're going to just cover a bunch of topics. There's so much going on at every level of government and politics. And I suppose we could include sports. I don't know if we have to. The 49ers had a pretty disastrous game yesterday. But Bob and I are just going to kick some topics around, give you the benefit of our wisdom, such as it is, and go from there. And the first up is Proposition 50, the redistricting measure that was put on the ballot essentially by Gavin Newsom. I mean, the legislature weighed in wholeheartedly, and it would allow them to redraw the lines to gain 5 Democratic seats before the next census. Historically, they're supposed to redraw the lines every 10 years after a census. In California, in 2008, I believe, adopted independent commission that does these things, is supposedly in a nonpartisan matter. It's interesting. I went back and looked, and before 2008, before the first election, which was 2010, the Democrats had all but 9 seats. Now they have all but 11. So it hasn't really changed things much in California in terms of a party split, but that may speak more to how the Republican Party has changed over the years than any particular gains from redistricting. But in any event, Bob, you and I have spent a lot of time on redistricting over the years. What's your first reaction to this?
Well, first of all, I look at Texas, and everybody says, "Oh, Trump, convinced Texas to do it." Anybody who's familiar with Texas politics and leadership there knows that it wasn't a hard sell. It's a pure power play by Texas. There's no justification for drawing the lines the way they're doing it and gaining 5 seats there. Now, the difference between Texas and California, as you mentioned, is we have an independent, supposedly fair redistricting process here in California that was approved by the voters. And the governor decided to basically set that aside in order to gain 5 seats here and offset what's going on in Texas. Missouri has already in the process of redrawing lines, which will give the Republicans a seat. Indiana is moving in that direction. Florida is seriously looking at doing it. So you can see where that's going. Now, my problem is with our governor is, I saw the one of his commercials, and it says, "We can defeat Trump and we can still maintain fair redistricting." What it should have said is, "We can defeat Trump and we can maintain fair redistricting unless we decide for some reason to set that aside from time to time." The other thing that really galls me, and I have a long history of being involved in this issue, is groups like Common Cause and the League of Women Voters, who basically have built their organizations on the idea of fair redistricting. When Newsom first said he was going to go ahead and redraw California lines, they were absolutely outraged. The presidents of both organizations came out and said, "This is horrible. You can't do it. It's awful." Newsom went ahead. It's on the ballot, and Common Cause and the League of Women Voters say, "Well, we guess it's okay this time." The hypocrisy in politics goes both ways. And I think it's part of, and some of what we're going to talk about today is the erosion of a democratic process that at one time operated very differently than it does today.
Well, you could argue, I suppose, that it's a return to a democratic process that was in place for centuries before we had this sort of good government wave. Yeah. I do recall a district that was drawn in one of them was the congressional district that included Palo Alto. At the time, Ed Schau was a representative of the district. It was a district that had been Republican basically until Anna Eshoo got elected. But it started in Palo Alto and ended in Stanislaus County. Yep. And there's an Air Force base there, and they said you could shoot a missile from the Air Force base and it would hit the ground before it reached the end of the district. And basically all they did was gather all the Republicans they could between here and there, stick them all in one district, and make safer districts for Norman Netta, for Tom Lantos, and all those people. Let me
just, if I can, let me just add a couple of those examples because I think they're important. Most people won't remember that San Mateo County Supervisor Tom Huning actually launched an initiative. He was able to gain the support of the League of Women Voters and the Paul Gann organization of Jarvis Gann fame that passed Proposition 13. Now, there were a number of districts at that time that the Democrats proposed. One was Fresno was put into a district with Carmel. Minority citizens living in part of Pasadena were included in a district in Bakersfield. And Newport Beach and a piece of Irvine were combined with Calexico, the Mexican border. If you're familiar with the geography of California, in addition to Mark's example, so it's not the way it should be done. We like to think that we choose our representatives. In fact, they choose us. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, we should note that the measure returns to the Independent Redistricting Commission after the next census, unless, of course, they pass another bill because another midterm election comes along and they don't like the way it's turning out. But the argument, and I'm of two minds about this because it's a valid argument that we're fighting by the rules that no one else is following. And at what point, from a political perspective, does it become foolish to say, well, I'm going to stick to my principle, even though it means the other guys are going to win in ways that are not fair? They're unprincipled. We've seen this time and again in a variety of contexts where somebody decides to set a standard to live by and nobody else lives by it. And those people often end up being known as losing candidates or losing issues. Yeah. So obviously their concern is the margins in Congress are so close that 5 seats could flip the majority, maybe fewer, depending on how it breaks down, which is why both sides are reacting that way. But what's wrong with saying, look, this is a temporary set of circumstances under unusual circumstances, and that there are a lot of things being done that the Republicans who are in the majority are not stopping the president from doing. We have to stop him. This is the only way we can. If we follow the rules, as Newsom says in the very same ad you're referring to, it would be like fighting with one hand or both hands tied behind our back.
Yeah, I understand that. And I think my larger point on a lot of things today is a steady erosion of principle, following the rules, saying, oh, you did it first, you're worse than I am, blah, blah, blah. Make no mistake, both sides are at fault in all this that's going on. What we're seeing is a total erosion that I don't think we've seen before. Maybe the Civil War, it's the last time, and we're in a difficult situation. I'm not condemning the Democrats. I understand Texas made a power play, California makes a power play, but it's part of an erosion that's going on in our country.
Well, but should California not be doing this then?
No, again, you say, it's okay, we do it this time. It's like being on a diet and saying, well, tonight I'm going to eat chocolate cake because, I had a really hard day. There's a slippery slope there that you go down. But no, I don't condemn California for doing it.
Well, you're talking about the erosion. In a column last week, I wrote that I have trouble understanding the excuse making, the rationalization that people provide for Trump. And what really struck me was at a funeral, for goodness sakes, he said, I hate my opponents. How can you be for a guy who says this kind of stuff? Sure, there are always going to be some things everyone does, every elected official does, that you'll be okay with. But at some point or another, at a time when the country's divided and the rhetoric's turning more and more violent, we historically expect the president to be the one to calm us down. And in fact, he's fueling that. And the response I got from readers was exactly what I was afraid. Well, he was joking. Well, Biden did these things first. You obviously don't understand how bad the Democrats are. And it's exactly what you were saying. Well, they started it, so we're going to finish it. And at some point or another, this has to come to some kind of an end, a resolution. Maybe it's a bad one, but I can understand saying, well, I'm tired of them winning all the time by breaking the rules. And of course, that argument is one that both sides make.
Yeah, no, I agree. In 2012, I looked at the election where Mitt Romney lost to Barack Obama. After the election, it's something I do and I've been doing for over 50 years, is following these presidential elections in a way that probably should be put away in a room somewhere and throw away the key. But it appeared to me after 2012, the Republicans were fighting a losing battle, and that the way things were at that point, there was really no way forward. They were going to continue to lose. The Hispanic vote was increasing by 2% every year. Obama had put together an extraordinarily significant, sophisticated operation, really bringing in social media into the presidential politics for both sides. What Trump did in 2016 is he reshuffled the deck, and he said, look, our country is not divided over who wants higher taxes, lower taxes, the debt, should we reduce the debt? Our country is divided over culture. And he made that the dividing line. And in many ways, I brought up the Civil War before, and when you say that, people say, oh, come on, the Civil War, how could we ever get to that point? Well, that was a war about culture. And if you understand culture, it's religion, it's how you were brought up, where you were brought up, your life experiences. Those things really have a determining factor. He also understood there were millions of voters who'd stopped participating in the system because they didn't think it made any difference. And he was able to divide the country along those lines. And in many ways, I think it's that has taken us to this point where we're on fire. Again, both sides are guilty. Both sides say horrible things. Trump gets a lot of attention for doing it. You're right. You and I, we're used to presidents that have a certain decorum and have a certain way of going. So I think there's a lot of fault for him. But that cultural divide, and then you add in social media, which has exploded, which has algorithms that if you believe one thing, it just keeps sending you stuff to reinforce that belief. You see the erosion of the media. You see the erosion of the courts. It's all contributing to where we are today in a situation that I'm not sure we can fix. I'm not sure where you start. I don't know. What do you think?
I'm not quite as pessimistic. I'm not quite as pessimistic as that. For the same reason, I understand what you're saying about the Civil War. I tend to be one of those who says, "Oh, come on," because slavery was such a fundamental dispute, and it's interesting to read about that time and the convictions that slave owners held that they were doing God's work, that they had a moral right and a moral imperative to be doing what they were doing. And it echoes in where we are now, in the sense that everybody thinks they're right, nobody thinks they're wrong, and the other side thinks everybody thinks the other side is amoral at best, if not immoral. But there are things that Trump has done that we've talked about this privately before. Just in terms of sheer politics, has broken every single rule we can think of. I mean, there are people we know who said something as inflammatory as Trump has, and it ended their career. But in this guy's case, it doesn't seem to do that. So you're right. He caught hold of something that was on people's minds, and he doesn't mind if the country's divided, as long as it's divided enough for him to succeed. And now we're seeing him do things, deploying troops to liberal cities. Portland is at war. I saw, I guess it was the Homeland Security woman saying that they were going to liberate Los Angeles from the communists who were running the government there. The range of the rhetoric is so out of line with reality that I can't believe it's sustainable. So I guess the question is, you for many years were a Republican strategist. Now that was Peninsula Republicans mostly, which were moderates, who are probably considered liberals now. Certainly are not Republicans anymore. Many of them are no party preference voters. But the party has gone someplace I don't think we ever expected it to go. And after Trump leaves the scene, assuming he leaves the scene, where does the party go from here?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I'm not here to defend Trump. I think he's outrageous in so many different ways.
No, and I don't think anybody's going to interpret that's what you were doing.
Yeah. But, I think the idea that when Trump leaves the scene, everything is going to be sunshine and lollipops is very naive. It's not. It's not going to change because those cultural divisions remain. And they're hardened, and it's going to continue. We're in a period of just pure power politics, more than we've seen before, where there are no rules. It used
I would argue that Trump is more effective at exploiting that than maybe anybody else could be.
Well, he is, but that doesn't mean those cultural divides are going to go away, and that doesn't mean those voters are going to say, I like Trump, but I don't like J.D. Vance or Ron DeSantis. I don't believe. I think we're in a very dark situation.
Well, it's an interesting question, because you do see people trying to emulate Trump's style.
Yes.
The outrageous statement, the name calling. J.D. Vance tries to do it, but it doesn't have the same heft. You're even seeing it on the Democratic side. This Prop 50 push, clearly Gavin Newsom is determined to emerge as the leader of the opposition. And one of the things he's doing, he would call it fighting fire with fire, is that he's baiting Trump. He's doing some of the very same things online and in social media and even in interviews that Trump was doing. The question is, does it ring true? Is it effective, or is it just sort of an echo?
Yeah, I mean, right now, Trump has benefited really over the last 10 years by his opposition. His opposition has made him stronger. His opposition, by just going crazy and just trying to take him out in any way that they possibly can, condemn him, he's benefited from that. All you have to do is look at week to week what happened during the last election cycle.
Although his numbers are not in good, his numbers are not in a good place right now.
Well, you say that, but according to Real Clear Politics, and there are others that have different numbers, but Real Clear Politics, I think, has been more accurate over the years because they include all credible polls. He's at 45 to 46% approval rating. Mm-hmm. Now, when you go beneath that, then you begin to see what you're saying. On inflation, he's at 39%. The economy, he's at 41%. Russia, Ukraine, he's at 37%. Israel and Hamas, he's at 38%. And I'm not including two areas in there. And those are the areas where he's doing much better, where the country is divided 48-48. And that's immigration and crime. Mm-hmm. And so it's no surprise that his focus is going to be on those two issues, because it takes away the focus from those other issues, which in the economy has always been an issue that really comes back to bite you.
Now as I said earlier, I don't think it's as dire as the Civil War era. And there is something, if you study history, we'll have a string of bad presidents, and then for good fortune or whatever, that tends to be when our best presidents emerge. If you look at the presidents before Lincoln, if you look at the presidents before Teddy Roosevelt, before FDR, and even into the modern era, we have. It always makes me think of the Winston Churchill quote: "Americans will always do the right thing, but only after they've tried everything else first." So the question is whether the Democrats can begin to put forward something credible, both in the midterms and in 28. And the thing I'm encouraged by, if that's the right word for it, is that I thought when Kamala Harris was doing her vice presidential nominee search, the Democrats have a pretty good bench of some senators and quite a few governors who look like people who could emerge as something. Now, the question is, how much does the social media environment and the culture war trump everything else, no pun intended? Because you know as well as I do, campaigns really often, most of the time, need to be about four things: jobs, the economy, safety, and security. And if you're not talking about those things, you're not talking to people. And if you look at the 24 campaign, Trump talked about those things. He may have been lying, but certainly he talked about them, and Kamala Harris did not certainly in any substantive way. So those are the issues where I think some of those numbers you're citing are beginning to show problems for the Republicans that maybe Trump doesn't suffer from, but another Republican nominee might.
Well, here's the problem, and this is different than we've ever seen before. Quinnipiac, which is a Democrat-leaning poll, always has been. Doesn't mean they're making it up. Their model is saying that this is the turnout, and that's what the Democrats are hoping for. They did a poll this week, and the Democrat approval rating in that poll was 30%. That is the lowest either party has had since we've started doing polling. So that brings a different thing. Normally, the party that's not in the White House will gain seats in the midterms. Historically, that's been the case. There have been a couple of examples where not. But the Democrats are at 30%. Real Clear Politics has their average at 32%. They've never been that low in my lifetime. The Democrats have always been the ones that were slightly ahead in polling in the generic votes and different things. They are in a bad place. They don't stand for anything.
Well, and that's the issue. That's the problem. That's why I mentioned the four things that campaigns ought to be about. I'm sure, like you, I get tons of emails from Democratic leaders and candidates. Almost all of them say, here's my strategy. And their strategy is we're going to win, which is not a strategy. It's a concept. But I keep thinking at some point somebody has to emerge with a message. I keep thinking about Newt Gingrich and his contract with America. It was the first midterms for Clinton. And agree with it, don't agree with it. It was a clear cut, here's what we're going to do on 10 key issues. Right. And every Republican congressional candidate but one signed on to it, and they won 35 seats.
Right.
I keep thinking that's going to happen. I've talked to both our members of Congress, Kevin Mullen and Sam Liccardo, and they say, well, the message is coming. It's being worked on. Okay, great. Can't wait. I don't know why they're waiting. And they act as though there's some big strategy afoot here. Well, we're waiting for the right time.
Right.
Well, as Martin Luther King said, I think of the fierce urgency of now. So I do think that there's still time for that.
Yeah.
And disarray is not uncommon. And the Republicans, when they've lost a couple of big elections, were all lost in the wilderness for a while too. So these things do ebb and flow. Before we move on from national stuff, I do want to talk just a little bit about all the fuss and feathers over Charlie Kirk. You know how I feel about the First Amendment and the right to free speech. I've lived my life operating under its protection. And so, the one thing I respect about Charlie Kirk was he was willing to go out into the public arena and state his ideas. That being said, boy, did he say a lot of awful, awful things that were hurtful, that I think were intended to be hurtful. And so putting aside the fact that he was willing to do it in public, I'm not quite sure he's ready for canonization. I get why they're fussing over him, but my God, he was ready to say things that in our lifetime you weren't going to say about women belonging at the home, having babies, and how much society suffered because women are working. He said things about blacks. I mean, it's just awful, awful stuff. And so, okay, respect for going somewhere and being willing to debate his ideas, but they're pretty awful ideas.
Yeah, I don't agree with Charlie Kirk a lot of what he had to say. I do agree with Ezra Klein, MSNBC commentator, who wrote an op-ed after Kirk was assassinated. Charlie Kirk did politics the right way. And what he meant is, yes, a lot of his rhetoric was hurtful. He's a strict believer in the Bible, a strict interpretation of the Bible. And there's a lot in there that is hurtful to people. But, what I look at, I didn't like what he had to say. All the things you said, I tend to agree with. But as a person who's been involved in politics in and around government for more than 50 years, Charlie Kirk, what he achieved, take away how you feel about him, what he achieved is remarkable. He built an organization from scratch.
Yeah, I understand all that. And he turned himself into a force in politics.
He did.
I read the Ezra Klein piece too, and frankly, I was appalled, because to say he did politics the right way, by appealing to people's worst instincts and the worst interests that they might have, doesn't strike me as good politics.
Yeah.
It may be good politics of the moment, but it's not good democracy, I would argue.
I believe that when you go into the lion's den, he was going into places where he was largely very unpopular at the beginning, and he engaged people. He argued. Yes, I agree. I agree with how you feel about some of the things that he believed in, some of the things that he pushed, but he engaged people. And it's why the youth vote went up 11% for Trump. Hispanic and African American vote went up dramatically. Why? Because young Black men and young Hispanic men somehow got caught up with him. It didn't carry over to women, but
I think what they reacted to was a definite point of view in a world where an awful lot of things, especially from the left, seem to be kind of mealy-mouthed and hedged. I understand all that. And even the rhetoric on the left that isn't mealy-mouthed and hedged is not broad, it's narrow. I understand all that. But to say it's good politics or to say it's good democracy, appealing to people's worst instincts, to me, is just another example of the weakness that democracy, in that it allows demagogues to come forward. The fact that he's willing to talk in public about it doesn't speak well of him. It speaks poorly of our country that he can sit there and say things like this and that it appeals to people because it's definite. Look, we're talking about a country that people want to eat ice cream and lose weight. So I understand the appeal of something that sounds definite, but that doesn't mean it's thoughtful. That doesn't mean it's constructive. And I don't think he was a constructive figure at all.
You can argue whatever you want. We're in a situation where all the old rules are gone.
Right.
The incentives in politics are today saying the most outrageous things, saying things that I'm sure we both would agree on either side are outrageous. That's how you raise money. That's how you distinguish yourself out of the other 535 people in Congress. The incentives are wrong. The cultural battle is devastating to us. I don't think somebody coming forward in 2028, a Democrat saying, oh, we need to get back to civility. We need to, it's not going to fly given our current political environment. We need a strong leader, a young leader, somebody of either party, somebody who for the first time says, look, we're both at fault. This is a mess. Let's figure out where we go from here. You know, you're right. It could be a Democrat may emerge to do that. A Gavin Newsom, who I'd say right now, I would say is the front runner on the Democratic side because he's engaging Trump. He's been taking Trump.
No, and he's engaging in the way you were just describing.
Yeah, but Gavin Newsom, I would argue, is going to have a very difficult time being elected president because of the structure. He's not going to do better in those swing states than Kamala Harris did. And so, you know, for the Democrats, and he's trying hard to rehabilitate himself. He's signing bills. He's doing all kinds of things to change his positions. He went on with Charlie Kirk, and they had a bromance session when Charlie was still alive.
That would be the right time to do it. Yeah.
It's actually in some ways it'd be better to do it now. But yeah, you know, we'll see what happens. My argument is we're in uncharted territory, and I would like to think that what you're saying is true. That we've been in these cycles before, and that we'll come out of it.
Well, okay. Let me wrap up this way. What's clear to me is we have gone in presidential elections from George W. Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden to Trump. What that tells me is the vast majority of voters are nowhere. They are looking for somebody to do something to take them in a direction they find useful in terms of jobs, the economy, safety, and security. Now, some of the issues like immigration fall into one of those four categories. In fact, a couple of them. So what that tells me is that nothing's in concrete. You could argue that that's why it's so chaotic. On the other hand, it means that anything could change back the other way. If we can go from those four in a row, what that tells you is somebody do something. And I think one of the reasons a lot of people voted for Trump was that he was definite, even if they didn't necessarily, I'll fix it. Yeah. Whether or not he could, whether or not he really meant to, who knows? But it was obviously a compelling message. I don't think that's done. I don't think that we're quite as at war as it seems. Also because, as you know, maybe even better than I do, the angriest people make the most noise.
Yeah.
And the great majority of people are just waiting for something to turn their way and to turn out better for them.
Yep. You know, I guess where you and I disagree, just looking back and over the years, I mean, we've had disagreements, but I think we both saw the world the same way. And we saw politics in a similar vein. I think the divisions are in concrete. I think people have chosen sides. Like when we used to play basketball as kids, it was shirts against skins. I don't think that's going to change. I think, and they're being reinforced. Their positions are being reinforced by social media and by people around them. So I'm just not as hopeful as you are. I would be thrilled if what you're saying becomes true.
I also do think anybody under 35 is growing up as a very sophisticated consumer of online information. And most of the young people I know, when they see something, they don't tend to take it at face value. They'll go to a credible news source, especially if it's a big news event. They'll go to a credible news source to see if that's true, or to see if it's being reported on in some more broad way. I'm going to shift gears a little bit, maybe even strip gears. While we've been on the air here, Bob Melvin has been fired as the manager of the Giants. I guess that should come as no surprise, although it was just a few months ago they extended his contract into 2026. So it shows you how things can change. but it's a shame. I mean, I mean, everything about the guy seemed to be that he was a good guy. All the players seemed to like him, but I guess that's just the way it works in baseball.
It does. I mean, Melvin, like Bruce Bochy, like others, has a long track record of great success. And it is unfortunate, teams that get mired at 81 as the Giants were this year, and are kind of in that area, that tier in baseball. A lot of it has to do with shifting direction, continually shifting direction. There's no continuity. So I think it's a mistake. Who knows who's going to follow Bob Melvin? But yeah, it's too bad, I think.
Yeah, I do have a lot of confidence in Buster Posey as the baseball president of baseball operations. And so obviously I would defer my judgment to somebody who knows a hell of a lot more about this than I do. But it would be interesting to see who they hire and what that person brings to it. I'm actually pretty optimistic about the Giants going forward. I don't think they're a lot of pieces away from being a very well contending team, and at least they're more interesting than they were just a year or two ago when they'd get down by 3 runs and you'd stop watching because they weren't going to score 4. It just wasn't going to. They got lost a lot of the way in terms of what they were supposed to be versus how they played. Hit a lot more home runs than you expected, and that's not what they were geared up to do. They didn't support, most notably Verlander, but even some of the other pitchers who struggled for lack of support. I want to switch back to our last topic because we're going on a ways, but I wanted to talk about a couple of local things. We had a couple of reporters on to talk about the sheriff a week ago. Just real quick, when she's gone, and I think it's safe to assume she will be, the judge, the retired judge who's sat through the hearing, has until October 13 to issue his judgment about whether or not the board should go forward with his decision to fire her. I'm assuming he will find something. I can't imagine he will dismiss everything that all the accusations that were made against her. Then the board has 30 days from there. I'd be surprised if it takes 30 minutes. I think they actually have to wait 24 hours. But last week, they voted to take direct control over the sheriff's budget. And it was evident from the rhetoric and the body language, there's no letting up on the sheriff, that they think that she's just doing a terrible job. Where does this leave the county when this is all done and the dust settles and they appoint an interim and somebody who ends up getting elected to the job? Is the county changed in any way by this?
Well, I think certainly the sheriff's department has. I think it's been devastating. We've had a number of people on over the last year plus that are within the department and have outlined what their life is like on a daily basis. So to me, the most important thing for a new person coming in is to set a clear direction, is to try to rebuild relationships within the department, try to get people working together for a common goal, having a certain level of fairness that people can buy into, and it can be rehabilitated over time. But it not only has, I think, has it changed the sheriff's department, it's changed the county. This is a county that has been, in my opinion, extraordinarily well run over the last 40 or 50 years, have had clear guidelines and rules and so forth in place. And this is an issue that is beyond anything we've seen before. And so I think it's going to take a period of healing. I hope they appoint somebody who can come in, who can build those relationships, and somebody who possibly has the ability, like say a Don Horsley did, or Jerry Hill, who is not a sheriff but a senator, of raising money, of working day to day to raise money to be able to run an effective campaign and to be in that position, because the work's going to take time to finish.
Well, years ago when I first started writing a column for the San Francisco Chronicle, I described the San Mateo County as a hotbed of social rest.
Yes.
It isn't anymore. And some of that's district elections, so that there is a whole different, I mean, certainly the district elections had the desired effect of electing many, many more people of color. And that brings a diversity, but there's a diversity of opinion. There's some parochialism that you would expect because somebody pays attention to their district and doesn't necessarily think of themselves as representing the entirety of the county or the entirety of the city that they're serving. So the politics are in transition, both demographically and politically. And so it'll be interesting to see where the new power bases are that emerge from this. The Deputy Sheriff's Association was never a power broker in this county. It was entirely consumed with its own business. Will it return to that, or does it become more of a player? It was never active in the Central Labor Council. Central Labor Council is maybe the most single powerful interest in the county now, partly because of just the dynamic leadership of Julie Lynn, who just brings a lot of intelligence and energy to this. So it's interesting to see it changing. The other thing that's changing, I mentioned it briefly, is the demographics. And we're seeing the emergence of the Asian community. I think we all expected at some point that the Latino community, just by sheer numbers, would emerge as a major player. But I think they've been outstripped by the Asian community. And there are some cities like Millbrae where they are a substantial portion of the population. So we'll see more of that. And that will change our politics too, in ways that I'm not sure I fully understand, because there are ethnic differences, there are cultural differences they will bring to the job that we haven't seen before in essentially an all-white dominated environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other things that's changed very recently is the incredible loss of jobs in our area. You had a lot of young people with huge salaries that were able to come in and buy homes, set down roots. And now those people are out of a job, probably moving on somewhere else in the country. It already is having a huge impact economically on the county, the peninsula at large. So it's not all bad. District elections, as you said, brings more people into the process. And we'll see how it plays out going forward.
There's an ancillary issue. I think we're also raising a generation of people who are convinced they can't afford to live here.
Yeah.
They can't buy a house here. I was reading something in the New York Times the other day. This is true all over the country, that there are young people who are in Tennessee, in Michigan. You pick a state, pick a place, who are beginning to think, I'm never going to be able to buy a house. Maybe they shouldn't have to. New York City got by with lots of people being lifetime renters. So maybe there's more there as a life than we understand it to be. But it certainly suggests a generation that's going to be transitional. It's not necessarily going to put down roots. One of the things you could count on is that young people would have certain views. They'd get married, they'd have children, they'd buy a house, and their understanding of community and their place in it would change and would deepen. Maybe that's not going to be the case.
Yeah. If I could just add one quick thing. We can't overlook the displacement that COVID caused for a lot of young people in their education as they started to move into the workforce. It's been a very difficult time for young people, and that will continue for a while because you've got kids that for 2 years, we're not in classrooms. So there are a lot of things at work out there.
No, in fact, you're talking about a generation. I'm old enough to remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we all had to go through air raid drills where we all had to crawl under our desks at school. And I remember them shutting the blinds in the classroom. And even then, I was 7 or 8, thinking, no, I was more like around 11.
Yeah, you were older because I was 8 years old during
that.
But
I remember thinking, I don't think this is going to help any when they dropped the bomb. But now we're talking about generations growing up with active shooter drills, with intruder drills, an insecurity. There have been plenty of studies that show that the insecurity of dropping the bomb affected us as a generation. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. One last question, given your background, if you had a client thinking of running for office, what advice would you give him or her other
Well,
than don't?
yeah, which is something that I did quite a bit. I think that basically it's a lot of the same things in terms of running for office. You've got to take advantage of every day once you make that decision. You have to raise money to be able to compete. You have to go out and meet people and do the same things. Certainly, when you get down into the politics of it, I'm big on identifying an issue that may be a little bit below the surface and really focusing in on that. Something that people can say, oh, he's the guy who believes in this. So a lot of those basic rules hasn't changed, but certainly social media has completely changed politics. We're seeing kind of a movement away from the impact of television more to the impact of online, communication, whether, whatever it is. So I think really being dedicated, really understanding what it's going to take to win is the first thing.
Yeah. It makes me think, you mentioned him earlier in passing, Jerry Hill. I always thought he was the perfect candidate because if you gave him a list of 20 things to do that day that needed to be done, he would not go to bed until he had done all 20 of them. Right. And that's the kind of drive that you're talking about, is you need to be ready to do what it takes. And you have to start with a network of people. You have to be likable. Yeah. Because at the level we're talking about, it really is still retail politics. You still have to talk to people.
Yeah. I can remember having candidates, you give them 20 things to do in order, and they would do 18, 19, and 20 and just say, boy, that's been a really tough week.
Well, thank God
no one explain a lot of the candidates, losing candidates that I had.
Yeah. Well, the good news is nobody has to listen to us about this stuff, but it's been fun talking to you about it. That has been another edition of The Game. I want to thank our buddy, our producer, Frank Bravo, whose idea it was, so you can blame him if you're really getting tired of hearing Bob and me talk. Bob and I, hearing the two of us talk. Yeah. But that's it. I'm Mark Simon.
I'm Bob Marks.
And that's been another edition of The Game. We'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye.